The hottest college football program in the market right now is USC. I mean, these guys just got one of the top tier coaches in all of college football when it comes to Lincoln Riley. And Lincoln Riley's doing a great job when it comes to recruiting. I mean, transfer after transfer after transfer. A bunch of recruits decommit from one school to commit to him at USC. So my question is, how good is USC really? How good would they really be next year? I mean, yeah, we're seeing all these top tier names committing to USC. But are they really filling out their depth chart, their roster? Are they really taking the proper steps to fill out a full roster and not just these hot names that everybody knows about and everybody wants? Because think about it, there's more than just receivers and running backs. You need your O linemen, you need your D linemen. So this video today, we're going to look at USC's full roster, whether it's their current players on the roster, players that decide to hit the transfer portal or NFL draft, players who are transferring into USC, and the recruits. We're going to go position group by position group and see, does USC really have a full roster to compete for a national championship next year? Stay tuned.
Whose world is this? The world is yours. The world is yours. It's mine, it's mine, whose world?
The first position room that we'll talk about is the quarterback room. It wasn't long ago before Kedon Slovis was considered one of the top passing quarterbacks in the Pac-12, potential Heisman candidate, and a surefire first-round draft pick in an NFL draft. But when the injury happened, Jackson Dart stepped in. And in his first game against Washington State, and he played crazy, Kedon Slovis pretty much never saw the field again. And it seemed like the baton was handed off to Jackson Dart, and Kedon Slovis would have to find a new home. Well, that was in the past. And in present day, neither of those guys will ever wear a USC uniform again. So when it comes to USC's quarterback room, they lost both their most experienced quarterbacks. First, Kedon Slovis. He hit the transfer portal, and now he's committed to play at Pitt next year. And Jackson Dart, who was a true freshman, also had a pretty good year. He's most likely will transfer to Ole Miss in my opinion, but at USC, he passed for over 1,300 yards with 9 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. So USC has a big void to fill with both those guys hitting the transfer portals and finding new homes. The only legit quarterback left on USC's quarterback room is a former 4-star recruit, and his name is Miller Moss. Now, Miller played in one game this past year, and that was against California on December 4th. He had a pretty decent game for a true freshman. He was 8 of 13 for 74 yards and 1 touchdown. So it seems like Miller Moss may be the answer unless they can get that commitment out of Caleb Williams. Now, if Caleb Williams comes to this quarterback room, that changes everything. But as of right now, he has not committed yet, and Miller Moss is the only quarterback on the roster. So in conclusion for the quarterback room, either Lincoln Riley gets Caleb Williams, who is 8 to 10 games more experienced than Miller Moss, or he rides out the inexperienced Miller Moss, and hopefully, he can groom him to the next QB1 for USC football. But as of right now, I'll have to give USC's quarterback room a solid D. The next position group is the running back room. Now, USC had one of the nation's worst rushing attacks until Keontae Ingram arrived from Texas as a transfer last spring. Now, Ingram managed to rejuvenate a horrible USC rushing attack, but none of that matters anymore because he entered the NFL draft. So USC lost his top rusher in Keontae Ingram, who actually rushed for 911 yards and 5 touchdowns. But they also lost their second top rusher in Vavae Malapai, who graduated and has told USC that he does not plan on returning for next season. Now, Vavae also rushed for 502 yards and 6 touchdowns. USC's running back room has actually grown to be one of the strengths of his offense, so we think. USC received commitments from 2 of the top and most well-known running backs in all of the Pac-12. First, from Oregon, Travis Dye. Travis actually rushed for over 1,200 rushing yards and 16 touchdowns to go along with 400 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. So Travis alone has USC as one of the top running back groups in all of the Pac-12. But USC didn't stop right there. They added another great name, another running back out of the Pac-12, and Austin Jones, formerly at Stanford University. Now, Austin is another great running back, and he has potential to take over the running back room if Travis Dye doesn't do what he has to do. Austin rushed for 378 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns to go along with 267 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. So both those running backs can do it all, whether it's rushing the rock or pass catching out the backfield. And to go along with those two, we have a 5-star running back in Malik Brown out of Modern Day High School. Now, Malik is an all-around running back. To be honest with you, in my opinion, Malik might be the best running back out of the three, but he's only a true freshman. But best believe Malik will be on the field this year as a true freshman, and I can say by the end of this year, or even maybe next year, because Travis died, he'll be the most featured running back in this offense. So now we'll move on to the receiver room. Now, USC had, if not the best wide receiver in the country, one of the best wide receivers in all of college football last year, in Drake London. Now, Drake had 88 receptions for over 1,000 yards, and he was the clear #1 receiver. And after Drake would have been Brew McCoy, a former 5-star recruit out of Modern Day High School as well. But Brew actually never got his playing career started as he was suspended. Brew is actually in the transfer portal right now, and this is not the first time he's been in the transfer portal. He actually went to Texas as a freshman, hit the transfer portal, then came to USC and got in trouble. So Brew never really saw the field and showed us what he has, but he's a former 5-star, and you have to respect that. And I believe he's a legit talent. But USC losing both Drake London and Brew McCoy is brutal. Currently returning for the USC wide receiver room is their #2 receiver and #3 receiver. First is Taj Washington, who had 54 receptions for 602 yards and 1 touchdown. And the #3 receiver according to stats is Gary Bryant Jr., who had 44 receptions for 579 yards and 7 touchdowns. And besides those two returning players, USC actually is bringing in a boatload of receivers who also can take advantage of Lincoln Riley's offense and thrive into a nice receiving core. First, we have Mario Williams, who is an Oklahoma receiver that Lincoln Riley recruited to Oklahoma. He was a true freshman last year and had 380 yards for 4 touchdowns as a true freshman. Next, we have Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son, who is a decent player and a really good receiver. Rice actually had 299 yards for 3 touchdowns for Colorado last year. And then the third and final transfer at the wide receiver position is Terrell Bynum, who played at Washington last year. Now, Terrell had 436 yards to go along with 4 touchdowns in only 7 games. So in all, this seems to be a legit wide receiver room that can add up and kind of match Drake London's production. I look for this wide receiver room to do real good numbers, especially with the right quarterback. But overall, I'll give this wide receiver room a B+. Now the next position group is the tight ends, and until last season, Riley rarely used tight ends. This is not a position I'm going to spend too much time on, but USC lost 2 tight ends that Lincoln Riley probably wanted to use. First was Michael Trigg, who is a transfer. He's in the transfer portal right now. Michael only had 7 receptions for 109 yards and 1 touchdown. He has major potential to be something big. It sucks that USC lost him to the transfer portal, but if he were to stay at USC, I'm pretty sure Lincoln Riley would have had something big for him. And the next tight end that won't be there next year is Eric Cromenhook. Now, Eric graduated last year, but he had 15 receptions for 137 yards and 1 touchdown. And the top tight end returning this year is Malcolm Epps, who had 10 receptions for 173 yards and 1 touchdown. If Lincoln Riley decides to use a tight end this year, it'll be Michael Epps, which isn't bad because he was the #1 tight end based on stats last year. And now let's talk about the offensive linemen. I mean, while USC's offensive line, especially their interior guys, exceeded expectations in 2021, there is no guarantee that they'll get that production back for next year, especially after they lost a key starter in Liam Jimmons to the NFL draft. Now, other interior guys, Andrew Voorhees and Brett Nealon, were both also eligible for the NFL draft, but they decided to come back for next season to play under Lincoln Riley. Now, the young tackles, Cortland Ford and Jonah Maheim, will have to prove themselves to a new coach as they had some struggles last year after the inconsistent freshman season. And they also gained one important piece for the offensive line through the transfer portal in Bobby Haskins, who played for Virginia last year. Now, Bobby plays tackle, and he was honorable mention All-ACC last year. He graded out as a 92 overall player at the offensive lineman, with 94% on run plays and 91% on pass plays. So that's a good addition as you lose Liam. But all in all, this offensive line can struggle. Besides their center and their guard and their transfer player, those 2 tackles, those 2 young freshman tackles have to step up and have a better season. If not, defensive ends on opposing teams will eat all day long. But now we're moving on to the defense side of the ball. Now, the defensive line was supposed to be the strength of the USC's defense last year, but that was not the case. Now, USC's defensive line is losing Jacob Leitenstein to the transfer portal after he posted 28 total tackles and 4 sacks. Now, this hurts an already unproven interior group on the defensive line. And then you have the edge players. You have Tuli Tuipulotu, who is returning as perhaps the most talented players on the Trojans defense. Now, Tuli had 48 total tackles last year to go along with 5.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 1 fumble recovery. USC actually brought in a 5-star defensive lineman last year who had a disappointing freshman season, and 5-star recruit Corey Foreman. But with a year underneath of Corey Foreman's belt, he should look to have an improved sophomore season and thrive to the 5-star recruit we all thought and we all think he is. Corey actually finished the season with 11 total tackles and 2.5 sacks. So that's not bad for a true freshman year, but being a 5-star and that big man on campus, we're expecting more. And I feel like with this new staff and a fresh start, I feel like Corey Foreman will have a great sophomore year and thrive into that spotlight that everybody thinks he should be in. USC has added a couple of defensive tackles from throughout the transfer portal. First, we have a TCU transfer in Earl Banquet, who is a 6'3", 277-pound defensive tackle. Now, last year, Earl had 21 tackles to go along with 2.5 sacks. And the next defensive tackle that they got from the transfer portal comes out of Kansas State in Tyrone Taleni. Now, Tyrone is 6'2", and he played in 10 games over the last 2 years. So that's not a lot of production, but hey, it's a big body. So in all, I look for Corey Foreman to take the lead role of this defensive line. And I feel like the interior defensive linemen will struggle unless these 2 transfers plug in and play right away and play at the high level. Now, let's move into the linebacker room. So right off the bat, USC is losing 2 of their top linebackers in Drake Jackson and Kenai Magua. Now, Drake had 37 tackles to go along with 5 sacks, 1 fumble recovery, 1 forced fumble, and 1 interception. Kenai had 92 tackles to go along with 1 sack, 2 PBUs, and an interception. The linebacker core also added 2 transfers to try and help out this kind of weak linebacking core. First, we have Shane Lee, who's a transfer from Alabama. Now, Shane was a former 4-star, and he had a crazy true freshman year at Alabama, where he had 86 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 1 interceptions. But over the last 2 seasons, he only combined for 9 tackles, 1 sack, and 1 forced fumble. And USC has also added an Auburn transfer in Romello Height, who is a former 3-star. Now, Romello only had 18 tackles and 3 tackles for loss from last year. And besides those 2 transfer guys, they also signed a 3-star recruit in Garrison Madden. In conclusion, losing both Drake and Kenai hurts tremendously. If Shane Lee can get back to his freshman season form, that will be great for this linebacker room. But in all, I feel like this linebacker room will struggle tremendously for next year. And last but not least, we have the DBs. Now, the DBs has taken a big hit as they lose their top 2 corners in the NFL draft. First is Isaac Taylor Stewart, who had 39 tackles, 1 interception, and 3 PBUs this past year. And next we have Chris Steele, who had 33 tackles for 2 interceptions and 3 PBUs this past year. Their safety should be decent as they had 2 freshmen who were plugged in, who had actually a decent season to be freshmen last year in the Pac-12. First is Caleb Bullock, who had 39 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 3 PBUs. And then on the other side, we have Xavier Alford, who had 31 tackles for 3 interceptions and 2 PBUs. So those 2 freshman guys had a pretty decent year, and I feel like that production will only go in the right direction as they get more and more experience underneath their belt. Coach Lincoln Riley hit the transfer portal, and they're bringing in 2 transfer recruits. First is Mekhi Blackman, a transfer from Colorado, who had 41 tackles, 4 PBUs, and 1 pick 6 last year. And the other transfer is one of Lincoln Riley's own recruits from Oklahoma, and Latrell McCutcheon, who actually had an up and down season as a true freshman last year, but he had 9 tackles and 2 forced fumbles. Now, Latrell is a former 4-star himself. And besides those 2 transfer guys, Coach Lincoln Riley has 3 nice recruits coming in, led by 5-star Domani Jackson, 4-star Zion Branch, and 4-star Fabian Ross. So in all, I see the 2 freshman safeties continuing solid play, and I feel like Domani Jackson, Mekhi Blackman from Colorado, and Latrell McCutcheon from Oklahoma will be in rotation as their starting corners. Those corners may get burnt early in the season, but as more time goes by and more experience, I feel like they'll grow into their own and ultimately make this DB room a solid one. And there you have it, USC's full roster breakdown. Like I said, I feel like they'll be a decent team. I don't think they'll make the college football playoffs, but I can see an 8 to 10 win season, especially if they get the right quarterback. If they can get Caleb Williams, I can see maybe a 10 to 11 win season. But comment below your thoughts. Do you think this is a good group? As we break down position group by position group, how many wins do you think this team will win? Do you think Lincoln Riley has what it takes to take USC to the next level? But in all, USC, they'll be better than last year, but I don't think they're going to be what everybody's saying. But we don't know. Comment below your thoughts. And while you have it, leave a like for your boy. And like I always say, if you love college football or college football recruiting, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now because it's free. But until next time,